The dust settled on Zara Wallace's reputation the same day they buried her husband, and by the time the last shovelful of dirt covered his pine coffin, the whispers had already started spreading through Petaluma, California, like wildfire through drought-stricken grass. She stood at the grave alone, her black dress borrowed from a woman who refused to meet her eyes anymore, and watched as the townspeople turned their backs one by one, leaving her in that cemetery with nothing but shame and memories she wished she could forget. It was late spring in 1878, and Zara had just turned 22 years old. Her husband Thomas had been 47 when he died, shot in a card game dispute that everyone in town knew he'd started himself. But that wasn't why they whispered. They whispered because of what came out during the marshal's investigation, about the bruises Zara used to hide under long sleeves even in summer, about the nights neighbors heard her crying, about the way Thomas had dragged her from the general store that one time when she dared to smile at another customer. The marshal had found Thomas's blood on Zara's hands when he arrived at their small house on the edge of town. And though 3 witnesses swore they'd seen Jake Brennan fire the fatal shot in self-defense during the card game, the damage to Zara's reputation was already done. The good women of Petaluma decided that a wife who didn't mourn properly was a wife who'd somehow caused her husband's death. Never mind that Thomas Wallace had been known as a mean drunk who'd beaten his horse and his wife with equal enthusiasm. Zara became tainted in their eyes, marked as something dangerous and improper, a woman who'd been touched by violence and hadn't had the decency to die of shame. Within a week of the funeral, Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house informed Zara that her room was needed for more respectable lodgers. The general store stopped extending credit. Even the church ladies who'd once invited her to quilting circles now pulled their skirts aside when she walked past. Zara had nowhere to go and no money to get there. Thomas had left nothing but debts and a reputation as foul as spoiled meat. She spent her first night without lodging in the small barn behind what used to be her house, now claimed by the bank, wrapped in the one quilt she'd managed to keep, and cried until no more tears would come. The next morning, she walked to the edge of town where a hand-painted sign advertised work at the Rising Sun Saloon. Her mother would have died of shame all over again if she'd known what Zara was considering, but her mother was 5 years in the grave and couldn't help her now. The saloon owner, a painted woman named Della who wore rouge even in daylight, looked Zara up and down with eyes that had seen everything twice. "You're that Wallace widow," she said, not unkindly. "The whole town's talking about you like you're diseased." "I need work," Zara said, lifting her chin. "I can clean, cook, serve drinks. I'm not afraid of hard work." Della studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll give you a job serving drinks and cleaning, but nothing else unless you decide that's what you want and you tell me yourself. I don't force my girls into anything. You'll get room and board and a small wage. The men will talk to you rough sometimes, but you handle yourself with dignity and they'll mostly respect it. The ones who don't, well, I've got a shotgun behind the bar and I know how to use it." So Zara Wallace became a saloon girl in the eyes of Petaluma, which only confirmed what the town had already decided about her. She served whiskey and beer to cowboys and miners, dodged wandering hands with practiced grace, and tried not to think about the future stretching ahead of her like an empty road with no destination. The work wasn't as bad as she'd feared. Della ran a relatively respectable establishment, and most of the men who came through were just lonely souls looking for a drink and conversation. But Zara could feel the weight of the town's judgment every time she walked down Main Street to buy supplies, could see it in the way mothers pulled their children closer, and men looked at her with eyes that held no respect. 3 months passed this way, summer heat settling over the California valley like a heavy blanket. Zara learned to laugh at jokes that weren't funny, to sidestep advances without causing offense, to pour whiskey with a steady hand even when her heart felt like it was cracking apart inside her chest. She sent every penny she could spare to a bank account Della helped her open, dreaming of the day she might have enough to leave Petaluma and start fresh somewhere nobody knew her name or her story. Then one evening in August, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, a cowboy walked into the Rising Sun Saloon and changed everything. His name was Ryder Edwards, and he was 26 years old with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water, clear and honest. He wore dusty trail clothes and a hat that had seen better days, and when he smiled at Zara as she brought him a beer, there was nothing calculating or cruel in his expression, just simple friendliness. "Thank you kindly, miss," he said, his voice carrying the slow drawl of someone who'd grown up in cattle country. "That's the first cold drink I've had in 3 days." "You're welcome," Zara replied, professional and polite. She'd learned not to encourage conversation with the customers, learned that friendliness could be misinterpreted as invitation. But Ryder Edwards wasn't like the other men who came through the saloon. He didn't stare at her body or make crude suggestions. He sat at his table, drank his beer slowly, and minded his own business. When she came to collect his empty glass, he thanked her again with that same easy smile. "I'm looking for work," he said. "Came up from Southern California hoping to find a position at one of the ranches around here." "You know if any of them are hiring?" Zara hesitated. She wasn't supposed to chat with customers, but something about this man's honest face made her want to help. "The Patterson Ranch north of town was looking for experienced hands last I heard. They run about 2,000 head of cattle." "Much obliged," Ryder said, tipping his hat to her. "What's your name, if you don't mind my asking?" "Zara," she said quietly, waiting for the recognition to dawn in his eyes, for his friendly expression to cool into judgment. But Ryder just smiled wider. "That's a real pretty name." "I'm Ryder Edwards. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Zara." He came back the next evening and the evening after that. He'd gotten the job at Patterson Ranch, he told her, and the work was good, honest labor that left him tired but satisfied. He always sat at the same table, always ordered just 1 or 2 beers, and always treated Zara with respectful courtesy that she'd almost forgotten existed in men. They talked in small snatches when she brought his drinks, nothing deep or meaningful, just the simple exchanges of 2 people getting to know each other. He told her about growing up on his father's small ranch, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the way the mountains looked at sunset from horseback. She told him carefully edited versions of her own life, about growing up in Sacramento before her father died, about how she'd always loved the smell of rain on dust. Other customers noticed. Some of the regulars started making comments, asking Zara if she was planning to take up with the new cowboy, suggesting she could do better with them instead. She ignored them with the practice of months, but she felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger. When Ryder heard one particularly crude comment from a drunk miner, he stood up so fast his chair scraped against the wooden floor. "That's no way to speak to a lady," he said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. The miner, a bulky man named Carson who'd been coming to the Rising Sun since before Zara started working there, laughed. "Lady? Boy, you don't know nothing about that one. She's the Wallace widow and there's plenty of stories about her. Probably helped kill her own husband." Ryder's hand moved to the gun at his hip, but he didn't draw. "I said that's no way to speak to a lady. Apologize to Miss Zara or take yourself outside." The saloon had gone quiet. Della stood behind the bar with her hand on her shotgun, watching carefully. Carson looked between Ryder and Zara, his face red with drink and anger. For a moment, Zara thought there would be violence. Then Carson spat on the floor and stumbled toward the door. "Not worth the trouble," he muttered. "Either of you." When the door swung shut behind him, the normal noise of the saloon gradually resumed. Ryder sat back down, but his jaw was tight. Zara brought him a fresh beer, her hands shaking slightly. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Now people will talk about you too." "Let them talk," Ryder said, looking up at her with those clear creek water eyes. "What did he mean about you being a widow? You seem too young to have lost a husband." And so Zara told him, standing there beside his table with a tray in her hands, keeping her voice low so the other customers wouldn't hear. She told him about Thomas, about the marriage her mother had arranged when Zara was just 18, and Thomas seemed like a successful businessman who could provide security. She told him about the first time Thomas hit her, how he'd apologized and promised it would never happen again. About how it did happen again and again, until apologies stopped coming and there was only fear and pain. She told him about the night Thomas died, how she'd been at home when it happened but the marshal had questioned her for hours, how the whole town decided she was somehow responsible, tainted by violence and improper grief. Ryder listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry you went through that. No woman deserves to be treated that way. No person deserves that." "The town doesn't see it that way," Zara said bitterly. "They think I'm cursed or evil or just improper. Nobody wants anything to do with me except to hire me to pour their drinks." Ryder shook his head. "Then the town is wrong. You're not tainted, Zara. You survived something terrible and you're still standing. That takes more strength than most people ever have to find." Tears pricked at Zara's eyes. Nobody had said anything like that to her in so long that she'd almost forgotten what kindness sounded like. "You don't know me," she whispered. "I know what I see," Ryder replied. "I see a brave woman doing what she has to do to survive. I see someone who treats people with kindness even when they don't deserve it. I see someone worth knowing." From that night forward, something shifted between them. Ryder came to the saloon every evening after his work at the Patterson Ranch, but now everyone knew he was there to see Zara. He didn't hide it or act ashamed. When other men made crude comments about her, he shut them down with a hard look or a few quiet words. When the town gossips whispered as Zara walked past, he walked beside her with his head held high, tipping his hat to the scandalized church ladies as if daring them to say something. Della watched it all with knowing eyes. One night after closing, as Zara wiped down tables and Ryder waited to walk her to her small room upstairs, Della said, "That cowboy's got it bad for you, girl. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know," Zara admitted. "He deserves better than someone with my reputation." "He deserves someone who makes him happy," Della corrected. "And you deserve someone who treats you right. Don't let this town's small-minded judgment ruin something good." But Zara was afraid. Afraid of being hurt again, afraid of trusting someone, afraid that Ryder would eventually see her the way the rest of Petaluma did. She kept him at arm's length even as her heart started to crack open toward him. They talked for hours, and she learned that Ryder had a gift with horses, that he'd lost his mother to fever when he was 12, that he dreamed of having his own ranch someday. He made her laugh with stories about ranch life and the various characters he'd worked with over the years. He listened when she talked about her own dreams, about wanting to see the ocean, about the book of poetry she'd had to sell when Thomas died that she still missed. September came, bringing cooler evenings and the first hints of fall. The Patterson Ranch was preparing for a cattle drive to Sacramento, and Ryder would be going with them. He'd be gone for nearly 6 weeks. The night before he left, he found Zara after her shift ended and asked if she'd walk with him. They walked through Petaluma's quiet streets, past darkened shops and houses where respectable families slept. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light over everything. Ryder was quiet, which was unusual for him. Finally, when they reached the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open country, he stopped and turned to face her. "I need to tell you something before I go," he said. "I know you probably don't want to hear it, and I know the timing isn't ideal, but I can't leave without saying it." Zara's heart hammered in her chest. "What is it?" "I'm falling in love with you," Ryder said simply. "I think I started falling the first night I saw you, and every day since has just made it stronger. I know people in this town treat you like you're something shameful, but they're wrong. You're not tainted, Zara. You're the strongest, kindest, most beautiful person I've ever met. You're pure to me, and that's all that matters." Zara felt tears streaming down her face. "Ryder, I'm broken. Thomas broke something in me, and I don't know if it can be fixed. I don't know if I can be what you need." "You're not broken," Ryder said fiercely. "You're hurt, and that's different. Hurt can heal. And I'm not asking you to be anything except yourself. I just needed you to know how I feel. When I come back from Sacramento, if you want to give this a chance, give us a chance. I'd be the happiest man alive. If you don't, I'll respect that too. But don't let fear or shame or what other people think make this decision for you." He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "You're pure to me," he repeated softly. "What happened to you doesn't change that. Nothing could change that." Then he kissed her forehead gently, tipped his hat, and walked away into the night. Zara stood there under the moon, her hands still tingling from his touch, and let herself cry. But these were different tears than the ones she'd shed so many times before. These were tears of hope. The 6 weeks Ryder was gone felt like 6 years. Zara worked at the saloon and saved her money and thought constantly about what he'd said. Other men tried to flirt with her, but their attention felt hollow compared to Ryder's genuine affection. She caught herself watching the road north, hoping to see the dust cloud that would announce the cattle drive's return. Della noticed, of course. "You've got it bad too," she said one evening with a knowing smile. "That cowboy's gotten under your skin." "I'm scared," Zara admitted. "What if I let myself love him and he changes? What if he turns out like Thomas?" "He won't," Della said with certainty. "I've been reading men for 20 years, honey. That Ryder Edwards is genuine article. He sees you, really sees you, and he likes what he sees. That's rare as hen's teeth. Don't throw it away because you're afraid." October arrived with crisp mornings and golden afternoons. The cattle drive returned on a Tuesday, and Ryder came straight to the saloon still covered in trail dust. Zara was serving drinks when he walked in, and their eyes met across the crowded room. Her heart felt like it might burst out of her chest. He waited until her shift ended, patient as always. When she finally came to his table, he stood up immediately. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Outside." They walked to the same spot at the edge of town where they'd stood 6 weeks before. The moon was smaller now, just a sliver in the dark sky. Ryder looked nervous for the first time since she'd known him, his hands fidgeting with his hat. "I thought about you every day," he said. "Wondered if you'd had time to think about what I said. Wondered if I'd pushed too hard or scared you off." Zara took a deep breath. This was the moment where she chose fear or hope, isolation or connection. "I'm terrified," she said honestly. "I'm terrified of trusting someone again, terrified of being hurt, terrified that you'll wake up one day and realize the town is right about me. But I thought about what you said. about not letting fear make my decisions. And I realized I'd rather be terrified with you than safe and alone. Ryder's face split into the widest smile she'd ever seen. Yeah. Yeah, Zara said. And then she was in his arms and he was kissing her, really kissing her, and she was kissing him back with all the emotion she'd been holding inside for months. It felt like coming home after a long journey. It felt like hope. They pulled apart, both breathing hard. I want to do this right, Ryder said. I want to court you properly. I don't care what the town says. I want everyone to know you're my girl if you'll have me. I'll have you, Zara whispered. But it won't be easy. People will talk. Let them talk, Ryder said. I meant what I said before. You're pure to me. That's all that matters. I don't give a damn what anyone else thinks. True to his word, Ryder courted Zara with a public devotion that scandalized Petaluma. He picked her up from the saloon every evening and walked her home. He took her to the church social despite the shocked whispers of the congregation. He brought her flowers and small gifts, a new hair ribbon, a book of poetry to replace the one she'd lost. When Mrs. Henderson loudly proclaimed that decent people shouldn't associate with saloon women, Ryder replied just as loudly that Zara was the most decent person he'd ever met, and maybe Mrs. Henderson should examine her own soul before judging others. The town remained divided in their opinion of the romance. Some thought Ryder was a fool throwing his reputation away on a tainted woman. Others, particularly those who'd known how badly Thomas Wallace had treated his wife, quietly approved. Della was delighted, regaling anyone who'd listen with stories of the devoted cowboy and his lady love. As autumn deepened into winter, Ryder and Zara's relationship deepened too. They talked about everything, sharing dreams and fears and hopes for the future. Ryder told her about his dream of having his own ranch, raising cattle and horses, building something that would last. Zara told him about wanting a real home, a place of safety and love that nothing could take away. They fit together like puzzle pieces, his steady strength balancing her hard-won resilience, her kindness gentling his rough edges. The foreman at Patterson Ranch, a gruff older man named Bill, took Ryder aside one day in November. "You serious about that saloon girl?" he asked. "Her name is Zara, and yes, I'm serious," Ryder replied. Bill nodded slowly. "Patterson's looking to sell off his northern section, about 500 acres with good grazing and a creek running through it. He's willing to offer favorable terms to the right buyer. Been impressed with your work. If you're thinking about settling down, putting down roots, might be worth considering." Ryder's heart raced. 500 acres would be enough to start a small ranch, to build the future he'd been dreaming about. But it would take every penny he'd saved and then some. He'd have to work harder than ever to make payments and get the operation running. Could he ask Zara to share that kind of uncertain future? He talked to her about it that evening. They were sitting outside the saloon, wrapped in coats against the December chill. Zara listened as Ryder explained the opportunity, the challenges, the risks involved. When he finished, he said, "I don't want to ask you to leave your work here and share such an uncertain future, but I also can't imagine building anything without you beside me." Zara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I've been saving money too, every penny I could spare from my wages. I have almost $200 in the bank. It's not much, but it could help." "Zara, I can't take your money." "You're not taking it," she said firmly. "I'd be investing it in our future if you want that. If you want me as part of this dream." Ryder took her hands. "I want you as part of everything, but I want to do this proper first. Zara Wallace, will you marry me? I don't have a ring yet, but I'm asking anyway. Will you be my wife? Will you help me build something good and lasting? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you're the best thing that ever happened to me, Zara laughed and cried at the same time. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church. The pastor, a kind man who'd never joined in the town's judgment of Zara, performed the service. Della came, dressed in her finest and crying into a handkerchief. A few of the ranch hands from Patterson's came too, along with Bill the foreman who'd told Ryder about the land. Most of the town stayed away, but Zara didn't care. She stood beside Ryder in a simple blue dress that Della had helped her buy, and when he slipped a plain gold band onto her finger and promised to love and cherish her all his days, she felt cleaner and newer than she'd ever felt in her life. "You're pure to me," Ryder whispered when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, now and always. They moved onto their 500 acres in January of 1879. The property came with a small cabin that needed work, but it had a solid roof and a stone fireplace. Ryder and Zara threw themselves into building their new life with determined energy. They worked side by side from dawn until dark, repairing fences, clearing land, planning where to build a barn and corrals. With their combined savings and the favorable terms Patterson had offered, they bought a small herd of 20 cattle and 6 horses. The work was backbreaking, but Zara had never been happier. She learned to ride properly, to help with the cattle, to fix fence posts and haul water and do 100 other tasks she'd never imagined doing. Her hands grew calloused and her skin tanned. She felt strong in a way she'd never felt before, not just physically but in her soul. This was hers, truly hers, built with honest work and shared with someone who loved her. Ryder was an excellent teacher, patient and encouraging. He taught her to read cattle movement, to understand horse behavior, to see the signs of changing weather. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire in their little cabin, planning improvements they'd make when they could afford them. Ryder often pulled out a worn notebook where he sketched designs for the larger house they'd build someday, with a proper kitchen for Zara and a wide porch for watching sunsets. Spring brought new challenges and new blessings. A late frost threatened their small garden, and they spent a frantic night covering plants with every blanket they owned. 2 of their cattle died from illness, a financial blow that hurt. But 3 others gave birth to healthy calves, and Ryder successfully broke 2 young horses to saddle, selling one for a good price that helped offset their losses. The town's attitude toward them remained mixed. Some people softened when they saw how hard Zara and Ryder worked, how devoted they were to each other and to building something honest. Others remained convinced that Zara was somehow improper and that Ryder was a fool for marrying her. The couple learned to ignore the whispers and focus on their own life. In May, Zara realized she was pregnant. She'd been tired and nauseous for weeks, attributing it to hard work and the one time she'd eaten suspect jerky. But when her monthly courses didn't come and her breasts grew tender, she knew. The realization terrified her. She'd never thought much about children, and after Thomas, she'd convinced herself she'd never have them. Now here she was, carrying new life, and all she could think about was what kind of mother she'd be, whether she'd know how to love a child properly after so many years of surviving rather than living. She told Ryder that evening while they were brushing down the horses. He dropped the curry comb he'd been holding and stared at her. "You're sure, pretty sure," Zara said nervously. "Are you happy about it?" Ryder swept her up in a hug so tight she squeaked. "Happy, Zara, I'm thrilled, terrified but thrilled. We're going to have a baby." He insisted she stop doing the heaviest work, though Zara argued she was perfectly capable. They compromised, with Zara handling lighter tasks while Ryder took on the more strenuous labor. He hired a teenage boy from town named Jim to help with some of the work, paying him what he could afford. Summer heat settled over their little ranch, but Zara bloomed despite the temperature. Her body changed, growing round with new life. Ryder was endlessly fascinated by these changes, talking to her belly and feeling for kicks. When the baby first moved strong enough for him to feel it, he cried. "I'm going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "I'm going to do it right, Zara. I'm going to be the kind of father my pa was, patient and kind and always there." "You'll be wonderful," Zara assured him, and she believed it. Watching Ryder with the animals, seeing his gentle patience and quiet strength, she had no doubt he'd be an excellent father. In September, as the days began to cool, Zara went into labor. Ryder rode frantically to fetch Doc Morrison from town, then paced outside the cabin while the doctor and Della, who'd insisted on coming to help, attended to Zara. The labor was long and difficult, and Ryder aged a decade in those hours, imagining every terrible thing that could go wrong. But when dawn broke, a baby's cry split the air. Della opened the cabin door, her face beaming. "You've got a son, Ryder, a healthy baby boy, and Zara's just fine." Ryder stumbled into the cabin to find Zara propped up in their bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a clean blanket. "Meet your son," she said softly. The baby had a wrinkled red face and a surprising amount of dark hair. Ryder took him carefully, terrified of dropping this precious burden. His son, his and Zara's. "He's perfect," Ryder whispered. "You're perfect. I can't believe you did this." They named him Jacob Edwards after Ryder's father. Jacob was a healthy baby with strong lungs and a hearty appetite. Ryder proved to be every bit the devoted father Zara had expected, walking the floor with Jacob during the night, changing soiled cloths without complaint, singing off key lullabies that somehow soothed the baby anyway. The first year of Jacob's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and early mornings, of first smiles and first teeth, of watching their son grow from a helpless infant into a curious baby who wanted to touch and taste everything. Zara discovered that motherhood came more naturally than she'd feared. The love she felt for Jacob was fierce and protective, and unlike anything she'd experienced before. The ranch grew too. With careful management and long hours of work, they increased their herd to 40 cattle and 12 horses. Ryder's skill with horses became known in the area, and people started bringing him animals to break and train. The extra income allowed them to build a proper barn and repair the cabin more extensively. They still dreamed of building a larger house, but that would have to wait until finances improved. The town's attitude toward them continued to evolve. It was harder to condemn a devoted mother and wife who worked beside her husband to build an honest life. When Zara brought Jacob to church on Sundays, some of the older women who'd once shunned her softened, unable to resist cooing over the baby. Mrs. Henderson remained disapproving, but even she couldn't deny that Zara seemed to be living respectably now. Della visited often, delighted with her role as honorary aunt to Jacob. "You've come a long way from the scared girl who walked into my saloon," she said one afternoon while watching Zara effortlessly juggle baby, cooking, and ranch accounts. "I'm proud of you, honey." "I couldn't have done it without you," Zara said gratefully. "You gave me work when no one else would. You treated me with kindness when the rest of the world had written me off." "You did the hard part yourself," Della insisted. "You survived. You stayed strong. You opened your heart again even after it had been broken. That takes real courage." When Jacob was 18 months old, Zara realized she was pregnant again. This time the news brought excitement rather than fear. They knew what to expect now, felt confident in their ability to provide for another child. Ryder hoped for a girl, someone they could name after his mother Sarah. But in March of 1881, Zara gave birth to another boy, just as healthy and strong as his brother. They named him Thomas, which gave Zara a moment's pause until Ryder explained his reasoning. "That name belongs to you, to your history," he said. "But we can give it new meaning. Our Thomas will be raised with love and kindness. He'll grow up knowing what it means to treat people right. We're taking that name back and making it mean something good." Zara cried and agreed. Their Thomas would never know violence or cruelty. He'd grow up in a house full of love, with parents who adored him and a big brother who was fascinated by this new small person. Life settled into a rhythm over the next few years. The ranch became increasingly prosperous. Ryder's reputation as a horse trainer grew, and they were able to expand their operation. In 1883, they finally had enough money saved to begin building the larger house Ryder had been sketching for years. They hired workers from town, and over the course of 6 months, a beautiful 2-story home took shape on the best part of their property, with a view of the surrounding hills and the creek that ran through their land. The house had a real kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a spacious front room with large windows, and 4 bedrooms upstairs. Zara cried when she walked through it for the first time after completion. "It's like a dream," she said. "I never thought I'd have something like this." "You deserve it," Ryder said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You deserve all of this and more. Everything we've built, we built together." They moved into the new house in September, just as Jacob turned 4 and Thomas turned 2. The boys were enchanted by their new home, especially the stairs they could climb. Ryder built them a small bed to share in one room, though he and Zara planned to give them separate rooms when they were older. That winter, Zara discovered she was pregnant for a 3rd time. She was 30 years old now, and this pregnancy felt harder than the previous 2. She was tired more easily, and her body ached in ways it hadn't before. But she was also more confident, more settled in herself and her life. Ryder was attentive and worried, insisting she rest more than she wanted to. In May of 1884, after a shorter but more intense labor, Zara finally gave birth to the daughter Ryder had been hoping for. They named her Sarah Grace Edwards, and she had Zara's dark hair and Ryder's clear eyes. Ryder was besotted immediately. This tiny girl who wrapped her impossibly small fingers around his rough, calloused ones. Jacob and Thomas were fascinated by their baby sister, wanting to help with everything. Zara and Ryder taught them to be gentle, to understand that babies were fragile and needed careful handling. Jacob, now 5 years old, took his role as big brother very seriously, often sitting beside Sarah's cradle and singing to her the same off-key lullabies Ryder had once sung to him. Life was full and busy and beautiful. The ranch continued to thrive. They bought adjacent land when it became available, expanding their holdings. They hired 2 permanent ranch hands, brothers named Pete and Sam, who worked hard and treated Zara with respect. The cattle herd grew to over 100 head, and Ryder's horse training operation became known throughout the region. Zara's position in the community had transformed completely over the years. She was now seen as a respectable rancher's wife, a devoted mother, and a woman who'd overcome difficult circumstances to build a good life. When she went to town with the children, people smiled and waved. The church ladies who'd once shunned her now invited her to socials and quilting bees. Even Mrs. Henderson had softened, particularly after Zara had helped nurse her through a bout of influenza. But there were still occasional reminders of the past. One afternoon in the summer of 1885, Zara was in town buying supplies with 7-year-old Jacob when she overheard 2 women talking. She recognized them as relative newcomers to Petaluma, arrived within the last year. "That's Zara Edwards," one whispered to the other, not quite quietly enough. She used to be a saloon girl, you know, before she trapped that cowboy into marrying her." Before Zara could respond, Jacob spoke up in his clear child's voice. "My mama wasn't a saloon girl. She worked in a saloon because she needed money after her mean husband died, and my papa didn't get trapped. He says marrying mama was the smartest thing he ever did. He says she's the strongest, kindest person he knows." Both women flushed red. The storekeeper, who'd heard the whole exchange, said firmly, "The boy's right. Zara Edwards is one of the finest ladies in this town, and anyone who says different can take their business elsewhere." Zara put her hand on Jacob's shoulder, pride swelling in her chest. Later, when she told Ryder about the incident, he hugged Jacob and told him he'd done exactly right standing up for his mother. "Never let anyone disrespect your mama," Ryder said. "She's been through things that would break most people, but she survived and built something beautiful. That makes her a hero in my book." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Thomas grew into a thoughtful, quiet child who loved animals and could spend hours watching the cattle graze. Sarah became a bright, cheerful little girl who followed her father everywhere and declared she was going to be a rancher just like him when she grew up. In 1887, when Zara was 33 and feeling settled in their prosperous life, she discovered she was pregnant once more. This pregnancy was unexpected but welcome. The baby, another boy they named Daniel, arrived in January of 1888 during a rare snowstorm. He was the smallest of their 4 children, but perfectly healthy, with a loud cry and a determined personality that made itself known from the start. Ryder, now 36, looked around at their 4 children one evening and shook his head in wonder. "Remember when it was just the 2 of us in that little cabin, wondering if we could make it work?" "I remember being terrified," Zara admitted. "Terrified of failing, of disappointing you, of not being enough." "You've always been more than enough," Ryder said, pulling her close. "You're everything. This life, these children, this home, it's all because you had the courage to trust me when the whole world told you not to, because you didn't let your past define your future." Zara rested her head against his shoulder. She was 40 years old now, with gray starting to thread through her dark hair and lines around her eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Her hands were work-roughened, and her body had been changed by 4 pregnancies and years of ranch labor. But she'd never felt more beautiful, because when Ryder looked at her, she saw herself reflected as he saw her. Strong, capable, beloved. The ranch, which they'd named the Rising Sun Ranch in honor of where their love story had begun, became one of the most successful operations in the region. They employed 6 permanent hands and hired additional help during busy seasons. Their children grew up learning the value of hard work, the importance of treating people and animals with kindness, and the knowledge that they were deeply loved. Jacob, as the oldest, was already showing talent for working cattle. Thomas had his father's gift with horses and by age 10 could gentle a skittish colt better than most grown men. Sarah was fearless and determined, insisting on learning everything her brothers learned. Young Daniel, still a toddler, was already displaying a quick mind and curious nature. In 1890, Della passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 58. Zara wept at her funeral, remembering the kindness of the painted woman who'd given her work when no one else would, who'd seen her worth when the world called her tainted. Ryder held Zara as she cried and reminded her that Della had died happy, knowing that the scared young woman she'd helped had built a beautiful life. The 1890s brought more changes. Petaluma continued to grow and modernize. The railroad expanded, making it easier to ship cattle and goods. New families arrived, and old prejudices slowly faded as the town focused on growth and prosperity rather than scandal. The story of the tainted widow and the cowboy who defended her became local legend, though the details grew fuzzy with time. Most of the younger generation knew Zara only as Mrs. Edwards, respected rancher's wife and mother of 4. But Zara never forgot where she'd come from. She made a point of befriending women in difficult situations, offering work when she could, always remembering how crucial Della's kindness had been. When a young woman arrived in town fleeing an abusive marriage, Zara and Ryder hired her as household help and made sure she had safe lodging. When the daughter of a disreputable family needed work, Zara gave her a job without judgment. "You're giving them what Della gave you," Ryder observed one evening, "a chance to be seen as more than their circumstances." "Everyone deserves that chance," Zara replied. "No one should be defined by their worst moment or their hardest time. People are so much more than their mistakes or their misfortunes." In 1895, Jacob turned 16, a young man now rather than a boy. He'd grown tall like his father, with the same honest eyes and steady disposition. He'd caught the attention of the Pattersons' granddaughter, a sweet girl named Emma, and Ryder and Zara watched with amusement as young love blossomed. It reminded them of their own courtship, though hopefully with fewer obstacles and less judgment. Thomas, at 14, was quieter than his brother but equally devoted to the ranch. He spent hours training horses with a patience that reminded Zara of Ryder. Sarah, now 11, was still insisting she'd never leave the ranch, that she'd work it alongside her brothers forever. Daniel, at 7, was the scholar of the family, always reading when he could sneak away from his chores, dreaming of things beyond cattle and horses. Ryder and Zara sat on the porch of their beautiful house one evening in late summer, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. Their children were scattered across the property, Jacob checking on the cattle with Pete, Thomas in the barn with the horses, Sarah helping Sam repair a fence while chattering nonstop, Daniel reading under a tree. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Ryder asked, taking Zara's hand in his. After 17 years of marriage, the gesture was so familiar it felt like breathing. "If I'd ridden into a different town that day, if I'd gone to a different saloon." "I try not to think about it," Zara admitted. "It terrifies me, imagining a life where I never met you, where I stayed trapped in shame and judgment, believing I was tainted and worthless." "You were never tainted," Ryder said, as he'd said hundreds of times over the years. "You were hurt and treated badly by people who should have protected you, but you were always pure, always worthy of love and respect. I just had the good sense to see it." "You saved me," Zara said softly. "No," Ryder corrected gently. "You saved yourself. You were the one who survived Thomas, who found work when the world turned its back, who had the courage to trust me to build this life with me. I just loved you. That was the easy part." Zara leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the sunset paint their land in gold and crimson. She was 42 years old, married to a good man, mother to 4 healthy children, co-owner of a prosperous ranch. She had respect in her community, friends who valued her, a life full of purpose and love. Sometimes she still had nightmares about her time with Thomas, about the years of fear and pain. But she'd wake up in the dark to find Ryder beside her, his breathing steady and peaceful, and remember that those days were long past. She'd survived them and found her way to something better. The scared, shamed widow who'd poured drinks in a saloon had transformed into someone strong and whole, not despite her past, but because of what she'd learned from it. "I love you," she said to Ryder, the same words she'd said thousands of times but which never lost their power. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else would." "Thank you for letting me," Ryder replied, for taking a chance on a dusty cowboy with big dreams and not much else. They sat together as the sun completed its descent, and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Their children's voices floated to them on the evening breeze, mixed with animal sounds and the whisper of wind through grass. This was their kingdom, built on love and hard work, and the radical belief that people deserved second chances. The years continued their steady march forward. Jacob married Emma Patterson in 1898, a beautiful wedding that united two ranching families. Zara cried happy tears as she watched her firstborn son commit himself to the sweet-faced girl who clearly adored him. A year later, they gave Zara and Ryder their first grandchild, a boy they named Ryder Jacob. Holding her grandson, Zara marveled at the continuation of life, at how her own story of pain and redemption had led to this moment of pure joy. Thomas courted and married the daughter of a horse breeder from Sacramento, bringing her back to the Rising Sun Ranch, where he planned to expand the horse training operation. Sarah, true to her word, showed no interest in marriage, declaring she was too busy helping run the ranch to bother with boys. Daniel, at 15, announced his intention to attend university if they could manage it, the first Edwards to pursue higher education. Ryder was immensely proud of all his children, of the adults they were becoming. He'd worried sometimes, during their early years on the ranch when money was tight and the future uncertain, that he couldn't give them enough. But they'd grown up rich in the things that mattered: love, security, the knowledge of their own worth. They treated people with kindness and animals with respect. They worked hard and dreamed big. What more could a father ask? In 1900, Petaluma celebrated the new century with festivals and speeches about progress and modernity. Zara and Ryder, now in their late 40s and early 50s, attended with their children and grandchildren. People who remembered the scandal of the tainted widow and the cowboy who defended her were few now, and those who did remember saw only the happy ending, not the painful beginning. Mrs. Henderson, now elderly and bent with age, approached Zara at the celebration. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble, "for the way I treated you when you were young. I was judgmental and cruel, and I'm sorry for it. You've proven yourself a fine woman and mother. I was wrong about you." Zara was stunned by this unexpected apology. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "That means more than you might think." "I was afraid," Mrs. Henderson continued. "Afraid of what you represented, of violence and scandal and things I didn't understand. So I judged you instead of helping you. That was wrong. I'm glad you found happiness despite people like me." They shook hands, two women who'd been adversaries finding peace in their later years. It was a small moment but significant. The past could be forgiven if not forgotten. People could change and grow. Redemption was always possible. The new century brought changes to California and to their ranch. Automobiles began appearing on roads that had only known horses and wagons. Telephones connected distant towns. The old ways were shifting, modernizing, evolving. But some things remained constant: the cycle of seasons, the demands of caring for cattle and horses, the satisfaction of hard work, the warmth of family gathered around a table. In 1905, Zara turned 52 years old. She looked at herself in the mirror one morning and saw a woman she barely recognized from the terrified widow of 27 years before. Her hair was more gray than dark now, her face lined by sun and time, her body solid with the strength of decades of ranch work. But her eyes were peaceful, and when she smiled, it reached all the way to her soul. Ryder found her standing there and wrapped his arms around her from behind, just as he'd done countless times over their years together. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. About the girl I was when we met, Zara said. How broken and scared I felt. How certain I was that I'd never be anything but tainted and shameful. And now I know that was never true. I was always worthy of love. I just needed someone to help me see it. She turned in his arms to face him. You gave me that, Ryder. You saw past what everyone else saw and found the real me underneath. You're pure to me, Ryder said, echoing the words that had changed both their lives so many years ago. That's all that matters, then and now and always. They kissed, no longer young but still deeply in love. Two people who'd built something lasting against all odds. Outside their window, their ranch spread across 5,000 acres now, prosperous and well-managed. Their children and grandchildren carried on their legacy, treating the land and each other with respect and care. Jacob had taken over managing the cattle operation and did it brilliantly. Thomas's horse training business brought buyers from as far away as San Francisco. Sarah, who'd finally married at 28 to a neighboring rancher, ran her own successful operation with her husband. Daniel, graduated from university with honors, had returned to Petaluma to establish a school, educating the next generation. On their 30th wedding anniversary in December of 1908, the whole extended family gathered at the big house for a celebration. Grandchildren ran through the rooms where Zara and Ryder's own children had once played. The table groaned with food, laughter filled every corner. Love was as tangible as the wood and stone that made up the walls. Della would have loved this, Zara thought. She would have been so proud to see what became of the scared young woman she'd taken a chance on all those years ago. Ryder stood and raised his glass, calling for attention. When the room quieted, he looked at Zara with the same clear, honest eyes that had first seen her truly all those years ago. 30 years ago, I walked into a saloon and met the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. The whole town said she was tainted, used up, not worth my time. But I looked at her and saw strength and courage and a heart that hadn't been hardened by terrible experiences. I saw someone pure and true, someone worth fighting for. He paused, emotion thickening his voice. These 30 years have been the greatest blessing of my life. Zara, you've given me children and grandchildren. You've built this ranch beside me. You've made every day an adventure. You've proven over and over that the town was wrong about you, not that you needed to prove anything. You were always exactly what I saw that first night, pure and perfect, just as you were. Zara wiped tears from her eyes as their children and grandchildren applauded. Jacob stood next, raising his own glass. To my parents, who taught us that love is about seeing people truly, not as the world defines them, but as they actually are. Who showed us that past pain doesn't determine future joy. Who built something lasting through hard work, devotion, and genuine respect for each other. The toasts continued, each family member sharing their appreciation and love. When it was finally Zara's turn to speak, she stood on shaking legs and looked around at the faces of everyone she loved most. I was 22 years old when my first husband died, she said quietly. I thought my life was over. I thought I'd always be defined by those terrible years, by violence and fear and shame. Then a cowboy walked into the saloon where I worked, and he looked at me like I was someone worth knowing. He defended me when others mocked me. He courted me publicly when others said I was tainted. He married me and built this life with me, and he never once made me feel like I was less than I deserved to be. She looked directly at Ryder. You saved me by loving me, but more than that, you taught me to love myself. You showed me that I was always worthy, that what happened to me didn't define who I was. That's the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. So thank you, my love, for 30 years of happiness, for our family, for seeing me clearly when everyone else looked away." The party continued long into the night, full of music and dancing and joy. Zara danced with Ryder, with her sons and son-in-law, with her grandchildren who stepped on her toes and giggled. She felt blessed beyond measure, grateful for every moment that had led her to this place. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Zara and Ryder stood on their porch, arms around each other, watching the stars. "Do you think we'll have another 30 years?" Zara asked. "I plan to love you for at least 50 more," Ryder replied. "But however long we have, we'll make the most of it, just like we always have." They did make the most of every moment. The years brought the normal challenges of aging, of watching their bodies slow and their hair go completely gray, of dealing with the aches and pains that came with decades of hard physical labor. But it also brought the joys of watching their family expand, of seeing their legacy continue, of knowing they'd built something good and lasting. In 1912, Zara and Ryder celebrated their 34th anniversary quietly, just the two of them. They rode out to the edge of their property, to a hilltop with a view of the entire ranch spread below them. It was a ride that was harder for them now than it had once been, but they made it, determined to see their kingdom from this vantage point once more. "We did good," Ryder said, looking out over the land they'd built together. "That scared young widow and the cowboy with big dreams. We did real good." "We did," Zara agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible." They sat together as the sun set, painting the California sky in brilliant colors, and held hands like the young couple they'd once been. Still in love after all these years, still grateful for the day a dusty cowboy had walked into a saloon and seen past shame and scandal to the pure heart beneath. The town of Petaluma had long since forgotten the scandal of the Tainted widow. Most people knew only the inspiring story of how Ryder and Zara Edwards had built the Rising Sun Ranch from nothing, creating one of the most successful operations in the region while raising a beautiful family. They were respected pillars of the community, sought out for advice and admired for their devotion to each other and their values. In 1915, at ages 62 and 63, Ryder and Zara finally slowed down their involvement in the daily operations of the ranch. Jacob had been managing things for years anyway, with Thomas and Sarah handling their respective areas. It was time to let the younger generation take full control while Ryder and Zara enjoyed a well-earned rest. They spent their days in quiet contentment, tending a large garden, reading together in the evenings, playing with their growing brood of grandchildren. Daniel, now a respected educator with his own family, visited often, as did their other children. The big house was rarely empty, always full of family stopping by for advice or just to share a meal. One evening in late spring, sitting on their porch as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, Zara said, "I've been thinking about writing down our story. For the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, so they'll know where they came from, what we overcame to build this life." "That's a fine idea," Ryder said. "Make sure you tell them the important parts, about how you survived when most people would have given up. About how you trusted me even when you had every reason not to trust any man ever again. About how love and hard work can overcome anything." "I'll tell them you're the best man I ever knew," Zara said. "That you saw me truly when everyone else saw only shame. That you gave me back my sense of worth and built a life with me that exceeded my wildest dreams." "Make sure they know you did half the building," Ryder insisted. "More than half. You're the strongest person I know, Zara. Always have been." In 1918, the world was changing rapidly around them. The Great War raged in Europe. touching even their corner of California as young men went off to fight. Thankfully, their grandchildren were either too young or not called up, sparing them that particular heartache. The ranch adapted to wartime demands, supplying beef and horses for the war effort. Through it all, Ryder and Zara remained each other's constant. They'd been married 40 years now, partners in every sense of the word. They knew each other so completely that they could communicate with just a glance. They'd weathered storms literal and metaphorical, celebrated triumphs and mourned losses, always together. On a cold morning in January of 1920, Ryder woke with pain in his chest. He tried to hide it from Zara, but she knew him too well. She sent Daniel racing for the doctor, but they both knew what was happening. Ryder's heart, which had worked so hard for 68 years, was giving out. The doctor could do little but make him comfortable. Ryder lay in their bed, the same bed they'd shared for decades, and gathered his family around him. He told each of his children and grandchildren how much he loved them, how proud he was of who they'd become. Then he asked for time alone with Zara. She lay down beside him, careful not to jostle him, and took his hand. "Don't you dare leave me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We're supposed to have more time." "We've had a lifetime," Ryder replied softly. "More than I ever dreamed possible. Zara, you made me the happiest man alive. From that first night I saw you in Della's saloon until this very moment, you've been my everything." "You saved me," Zara whispered. "You saved yourself," Ryder corrected, as he always had. "I just loved you. That was easy. You were always pure to me, always perfect, always exactly what I needed. Promise me you'll remember that after I'm gone. Promise me you won't go back to believing the lies that town told about you." "I promise," Zara said, holding him close. "I know my worth now. You taught me that, you and our life together." Ryder smiled even through his pain. "That's my girl. Stay strong. Watch our family grow. Know that I'll be waiting for you when your time comes, and we'll ride through heaven together." He died peacefully an hour later, with Zara holding his hand and whispering her love. She felt his spirit leave, felt the absence of him like a physical wound. But she also felt the legacy of their love surrounding her, in their children's tears, in the ranch they'd built, in the proof that love could overcome anything. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Ryder Edwards had been respected throughout the region, known as an honest man who treated everyone fairly and loved his wife devotedly. The pastor spoke about the love story of Ryder and Zara, about how a cowboy had defended a widow the whole town had judged, how he'd built a life and legacy with her that would endure for generations. Zara, now 65 years old and suddenly alone for the first time in 42 years, stood at the grave and remembered. She remembered meeting Ryder's clear, honest eyes across a saloon, remembered him standing up for her when no one else would, remembered him saying, "You're pure to me, that's all that matters," and meaning it with his whole heart. Remembered building a ranch and a family, surviving hardships and celebrating joys, always together. The first months without Ryder were the hardest of Zara's life, worse even than the time after Thomas died, because this time she was losing someone she truly loved. She woke reaching for him and found empty space. She cooked his favorite meals out of habit before remembering he wouldn't be there to eat them. She wanted to tell him things, share observations and jokes, only to remember he was gone. But she had promised him she'd stay strong, and Zara kept her promises. She leaned on her children and grandchildren, letting them support her through her grief. She continued tending her garden and helping with the ranch books when Jacob needed advice. She wrote down their story, just as she'd said she would, so future generations would know about the cowboy and the widow and the pure love they'd shared. Slowly, the sharp edge of grief dulled to a manageable ache. Zara found joy again in her family, in watching great-grandchildren born and toddling around the ranch. She told them stories about their grandfather, about his skill with horses, his patience with children, his devoted love for his wife. She made sure they knew what kind of man he'd been, so his legacy would live on through them. Zara lived another 8 years without Ryder, years filled with family and purpose. She saw Jacob's children have children of their own. She saw Thomas honored for his contributions to horse breeding. She saw Sarah become a respected rancher in her own right. She saw Daniel's school flourish and expand. The Rising Sun Ranch continued to prosper under Jacob's management, a testament to the foundation Ryder and Zara had built. On a warm summer evening in 1928, Zara sat on the porch of the big house, surrounded by 3 generations of family. She was 74 years old, her body worn out from years of hard living and hard work, but her spirit remained strong. She told stories about the old days, about building the ranch with nothing but determination and love, about a cowboy who'd seen past shame and scandal to the truth beneath. That night, Zara went to sleep in her bed and didn't wake up. She died peacefully, her heart simply giving out, ready to join the man she'd loved for 50 years. Her children found her in the morning with a slight smile on her face, as if she'd seen something beautiful in her dreams. The funeral was even larger than Ryder's had been. Zara Edwards had become a legend in her own right, the strong woman who'd overcome scandal and hardship to build an empire. But more than that, she'd been a mother, grandmother and great-grandmother who'd loved fiercely and taught her family the importance of seeing people truly, of not judging based on circumstances, of believing that everyone deserved second chances. They buried her beside Ryder, their graves side by side under a large oak tree on the ranch they'd built together. The headstones were simple, but inscribed with words that told their story. Ryder Edwards, beloved husband and father who saw truly. And Zara Edwards, beloved wife and mother, pure of heart. The Rising Sun Ranch continued for generations, passed down through their children and grandchildren. The story of how it began, of the tainted widow and the cowboy who'd loved her, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It taught them about courage and love, about seeing past judgment to truth, about the power of believing in someone when the whole world says you shouldn't. In later years, when people asked about the ranch's name, they were told about Della's saloon where Zara had worked and Ryder had found her. The rising sun became a symbol of new beginnings, of hope emerging from darkness, of the way love could transform everything. The town of Petaluma grew and changed over the decades, but the Edwards family remained a constant, respected and admired. They treated their workers fairly, managed their land responsibly, and contributed to the community. They embodied the values Ryder and Zara had instilled: hard work, honest dealing, and the radical belief that everyone deserved to be seen for who they truly were, not judged by their worst moments. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun painted the California sky in brilliant colors, family members swore they could feel the presence of their ancestors, the cowboy and his widow, still riding through their land, still in love, still together as they'd always been. Their story became more than just family history. It became a reminder that love could overcome anything, that past pain didn't determine future joy, and that sometimes all it took was one person willing to say, "You're pure to me." That's all that matters, and mean it with their whole heart. The legacy of Ryder and Zara Edwards lived on not just in the land they'd claimed and the ranch they'd built, but in every child and grandchild who learned to see people truly, to offer second chances, to believe that love was always worth fighting for. They proved that a tainted reputation could be overcome, that shame and scandal were no match for genuine devotion, and that two people with nothing but each other and a dream could build something that would last forever. Their love story became the foundation upon which generations were built, a testament to the power of seeing past judgment to truth, of believing in someone when the world says you shouldn't, of loving purely and completely regardless of what anyone else thinks. And that, in the end, was their greatest legacy, more valuable than any amount of land or cattle or money. They taught their family and anyone who knew their story that love, true love, could overcome anything. That was the gift Ryder and Zara gave to the world, and it endured long after they were gone.